Russia, the year 2000. A summer day. We're 30 kilometers west of Moscow in a suburb by a highway. And you wouldn't necessarily guess it, but it's the center of power of modern Russia. It's informally known as Rublevka, and all the rich and powerful have mansions there. It's Russia's billionaires' row, and that day, they have all gathered. There is Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who controls big parts of Russia's oil. There's Mikhail Friedman, who has his hands in oil, retail, Boris Berezovsky, the media tycoon, Vladimir Putin, Arvin, and more. They have all gathered at the mansion, and they're being served a barbecue. The mansion belongs to the Russian state, and the man they came to see there is called Vladimir Putin. Those rich men don't know it yet, but that day would fundamentally change Russia's history. Let's rewind. Vladimir Putin is obviously the president of Russia since 1999. In the West, he is most famous for being a thug in international politics, for invading Ukraine, for trolling Western media, and for poisoning people in peripheral places with Soviet nerve agents. For Russians, he is the man who finally brought the country stability after 10 years of anarchy in the 90s, and who oversaw the country getting wealthy during the oil boom in the early 2000s. But he is also feared for rigging elections, for persecuting minorities, for arresting political opponents, and for controlling the media. And he is corrupt. It is rumored that he is worth $40 billion and owns a gigantic palace by the Black Sea, funded with his country's oil money. Nevertheless, Putin used to be incredibly popular for his role as a strongman with Russians before the Ukraine war. But his popularity has been falling as the oil boom is over and the war has started. The country's economy is wrecked by corruption and sanctions, Russians are getting poorer and unhappier, and Putin responds with more and more repression. The number of political prisoners in Russia is 8 times higher than 6 years ago. The fear of repression and state violence is at an all-time peak. And since the start of the war, laws have become yet stricter and police yet more brutal. Nevertheless, opposition parties are weak. They're polling at most around 20%. In 2020, Putin held a referendum on a new constitution and won. He can legally serve 2 more terms and could be in power until 2036. So Putin is a pain. But why is he still so powerful that he can do all those things? What needs to happen for Putin to be toppled? Political science has a theory about this, and it's so famous it has even made it to Netflix recently. How to Be a Tyrant is based on a book called The Dictators Handbook, written by the US political scientist Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. The book is an attempt to popularize the theory that Bueno de Mesquita developed with a few other people outside of political science, tellingly by showing people how to use knowledge for evil. The theory is called Selectorate Theory, and it says that the power of every government depends on the group of people who select the leader, the Selectorate. In a democracy, that's obviously the people, mostly those over 18. In dictatorships, it's different. In monarchies, it's the royal family, like in Saudi Arabia. In military dictatorships, it's, well, the military, like in Egypt. In civilian dictatorships, it can be a dominant party, like in China, or in personalist civilian dictatorships, like Russia, where one person controls most decisions, the leader may rely on any other powerful group of people. Given that they don't have an obvious base, except for the leader's omnipotence, it's often secret polices and repression that force support and keep the dictator in power. Everyone who's outside the Selectorate doesn't have a say. They are disenfranchised. And Selectorate theory assumes that politicians don't care much about them, because all they want is power. So all they care about is to convince a sufficient amount of the Selectorate to support them. The group of people necessary to lift the leader into power and keep them there is called a winning coalition. In most democracies, that's as many voters as it takes to get 50% of seats in parliament. How to win the Selectorate over? Run the country well enough that you make enough money to buy the support of your winning coalition. Is that money, or important positions, or other favors? In short, a leader stays in power if he's supported by a majority of the Selectorate. So, to topple a leader, you need to break their support. And Russia is a textbook example. To understand this, we have to go back in time. Russia used to be a part of the Soviet Union, a communist state where the Communist Party controlled everything. Politics, oil, gas, electricity, telecoms, media, the military, you name it. They also had a very powerful secret service, the KGB, that controlled not only spies, but also the police and a lot of the money of the state. But that didn't last. In the late 80s, the Soviet Union fell apart. The KGB and the communist military elites, the so-called Sylviki, secretly managed to channel lots of the Soviet money and power their way. And a group of young up-and-coming entrepreneurs grabbed everything else. Those entrepreneurs became what we now call the Russian oligarchs. Russia was a democracy on paper, but in reality, power was with those guys, because they controlled all the resources. They could actually win elections for presidents single-handedly, like in 1996, when the oligarchs' media outlets supported Yeltsin, and they also massively propped up his campaign budget. So the electorate in Russia really are the oligarchs and the Sylviki, now businessmen or part of the new secret service FSB. But it was really the oligarchs that were powerful under the weak President Yeltsin, who was an unpopular alcoholic. As he was leaving office, the president and his favorite businessman chose a successor who was thought to be loyal, but also smart enough to protect their interests, Vladimir Putin. Former C-list KGB spy turned political fixer. Putin first became the head of the FSB, then Yeltsin's prime minister, and then, when Yeltsin stepped down, the president. Which brings us to that fateful summer day 21 years ago. Putin invited the oligarchs to the president's countryside residence, and he made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He would give them license to do business as they please, bag as many profits as they could, and not fear that their dodgy practices be scrutinized. But in turn, they would stay away from politics. This was later called the BBQ Agreement. So now Putin had created himself a winning coalition, restricting the oligarchs and promoting the Sylviki. It worked because he gave the oligarchs the perfect conditions to make money, in return for them retreating from politics and not challenging his rule. And as a former spy, he made the Secret Service the major pillar of the Selectorate by giving lots of power and leeway to the Sylviki. Not everyone in the Selectorate supported Putin, but with the support of a winning coalition of the Selectorate, Putin could afford to purge everyone who opposed him. His challengers were exiled, jailed, or found dead under mysterious circumstances. And Putin also made the Selectorate just a bit larger by redistributing some assets to trusted allies like his childhood judo buddies. The bigger the Selectorate is, the more must the members of the winning coalition fear that they might be replaced, and the more loyal are they to the dictator. With those moves, Putin united the Selectorate behind him and became a powerful leader. And keeping the Selectorate happy is all Putin needs to stay in power. So to push him out, you have to somehow turn the Selectorate, the oligarchs, and the Sylviki against him. But here's an interesting thing. According to research by the political scientist Barbara Geddes, personalist dictators last on average 15 years. Putin is at more or less 21, way past the average dictator. And that shows that Putin is able to sustain his winning coalition a lot better than other dictators, so he's a lot harder to topple. The reason is, Russia has gas and oil, and European countries have none. As long as other countries keep buying resources from Russia, Putin has enough money to pay off his cronies. Several countries have been trying to break the support of the winning coalition for Putin by putting sanctions on the oligarchs. This would reduce their wealth, so they don't benefit from Putin anymore and have no reason to back him. There are some signs that it has worked. A few oligarchs have been calling for the war to be ended, but it might not be enough. Because Putin can keep his winning coalition happy by compensating them for losses with gas and oil money. So, to turn up the heat on Putin, European countries will have to turn theirs down and stop buying gas and oil from Russia. And also, experts think that it's really the Sylviki who are calling the shots in the winning coalition. They may be losing some money through sanctions, but in Putin's Russia, they still get power and the opportunity to indulge in fantasies of restoring the Soviet Union through the Ukraine war. And with the Sylviki's capacity to suppress dissent through assassinations, Putin can get rid of any rival or defector. So any plot to overthrow Putin needs to win over the Sylviki. But at the end of the day, a personless dictatorship is a system depending on mainly one person, the dictator himself. If the dictator steps down, the system that used to protect him will go with him. That means the former dictator and his friends, now no longer protected, may be the first victims of the new government. So personalist dictators and their winning coalition will go very far to keep the dictator in power and protect themselves. That's why Putin's Russia has become so repressive. That's why such dictatorships are more likely to end in violence. So whatever happens, given what's at stake for them, Putin and his allies could make getting rid of them very costly.